Hello, I am William Jamarite,
And I'm Hattie.
and this is our podcast. What are we doing? And so, on today's episode, we're actually going to discuss if, like, athletes slash employees should have a say in like who their co-workers or like bosses are. And this comes up because recently in the NBA, there's been a movement for like player empowerment, and so the players are looking at themselves as more like partners with the owners, and feel like they should have a say in like who comes in and who's a part of the team, and then this is kind of backfired on some players in that like they try to like put together the team, and then all of a sudden you look at the team and it's like the team is not performing very well.
Stay in your lane type thing.
Yeah. All right,
do what you're good at, let the other people who are good at what they do that.
And so it just got me thinking, like, so like if you're an employee or if you're an athlete, like, should you have a say in like if there's like an opening for like your supervisor? Like, should you have a say in like who that supervisor is going to be? Or like if you have an opening on your like staff, like, and somebody that you're going to be working with, like, should like the staff members have a say in like who the new staff member is going to be? And like, if you think about it in terms of percentages, like how much of a like
how big of
influence should they have?
So it's interesting that you asked this. Do you have any experience working somewhere and hiring your department hiring someone new?
So me personally, I do not have any experience of like, hey, like we have this opening in our department. We're going to be hiring someone new, and so like I would definitely like to know like, hey, what do you think, William? But I have like I have seen it where like I go in for an interview and then like I talk to these different people that are part of the department, and like it seems to me that like everybody has some say in the hiring process. So it, to me, it doesn't seem like it's that like out of the realm of like
out of the ordinary.
Out of the ordinary. Like, hey, like we're gonna have to work with this person. Like, we should have a say in like who that person is, and we might not have the ultimate decision, but like we should have a say in like who the person is we're going to hire.
And I would say that's exactly how it's worked at Exponent, where I work now, and as well as in grad school. Anytime we would be hiring, I guess hiring might not be the right word, but admitting a new graduate student, you know, we all interview them, and there's like a time where it's all of us together, and there's time where it's kind of one-on-one, and after the fact we all discuss. And you know, none of us grad students would be able to, like, unless there was something egregious, none of us would be able to give the final say, but certainly Lou and the other postdocs would be very interested, like, oh, these three people felt good vibes, like these two felt bad vibes, like this is really interesting to know and concerning, right? And generally if everyone feels good vibes, then we're ready to move forward. And if like one person feels like meh vibes, you know, that's still okay, we can move forward. But if one person is feeling like actual negative vibes, that's a big concern. And the same at Exponent. I would think it's, I feel like at Exponent though, so for grad school, the student still has to meet certain criteria. And so the grad school themselves has to admit the student. And then it's like, do we want that student in our lab? So there's kind of this already, there's multiple kind of cutoff points.
Yeah, that they, and so if they've already been admitted to graduate school, then the next part is, will they get into the lab?
Correct. And so
and
there's
so if
plenty
they don't get into the lab, what would they?
So that happens a lot of where, and this is why when you're applying to graduate school, one of the main pieces of advice is to reach out to the heads of the labs, because plenty of people apply to graduate school and the graduate school's like, oh yeah, you meet our criteria, like here's the, you go into a pile, and all the professors that have opening into their labs go look through the pile, and they're like, well, this person might work, like whatever. But if they already have somebody in mind, they're not going to go look at the pile. And so there's plenty of people that get into graduate school, but no advisor takes them, and so then they don't get into the. So it depends on the school. Some schools have it set up where you come in, you do rotations, or like you come in and you have 6 months to like make that connection and find one. But that's what happened to me when I applied to Duke. I didn't really make any connections to any advisors, and so I didn't hear back, and was like, well, I better look at other options. And I had applied to Purdue, and there was a new professor starting there, so no one had been, talking to him. So he goes to the pile, and he sees me in the pile, and is like, this is a star student, like, let's fly her out here, let's, he's like ready to go. It was a great thing, and I was this close to going there, because I hadn't heard back from Duke. Like, Duke had not said, because just because the grad school admits you, like, let's not say admit. If you meet the grad school's requirements and you go into the pile, you're not admitted yet. You're just able to be admitted if one of the advisors wants you.
Yeah, so that's that was my question, because I would be like, wouldn't you want to like find a lab before like
yes, and so that's why and that's why I was saying different schools have different rules, but that's how it is at Duke, and that's why it's like the second to last day of school, and I'm in Dale's class, and he's asking us all, what's your future plans? And we're going around the room, each saying their thing, and I'm like, oh, I'm interested in going to graduate school, like I had applied here, but I think I'm going to be going to Purdue, like da da da. And he was like, talk to me after class. And so I talked to him after class, and he's like, oh, like I think you're a great student. I'm really, I didn't realize you were interested in doing graduate school. Like, what makes you interested in doing graduate school here at Duke? And I explained all this stuff, and I wished I could have done it with Lou, but Lou wasn't high enough rank to get a graduate student at that time. So, but I'm really interested in this line of research, da da da. And Dale's like, well, my lab does very similar line of research. And I was like, yeah, but are you looking for students? And he's like, actually, I am. Do you want to come up for an interview? And I was like, sure. So like class ended at like 3:30 on a Friday. So impromptu interview. I go up to his office that exact day, right after this conversation. Go up to his office. We're chatting for like 30 minutes. Come up with all these really interesting stuff. And I was originally, like, the idea we discussed was doing research on child car seat safety, actually. And then he's like, well, all my grad students are here, like, why don't you speak to each one of them individually? And so then I had the one-on-ones, like, super impromptu. They didn't prepare for it. And at the end of it, he was like, well, if you're interested in coming here, like, I have a spot open. And I don't know if he then took time to talk to the grad students or whatever, because by the time so this is when I was living off campus, so it was like a 25-30 minute walk. So there was theoretically time, just not like an extreme amount of time. Like, but by the time I got home and opened up my computer, I had an acceptance letter from Duke being like, well, you're accepted to the graduate school. You'll be in Dale Bass's lab. Here's your amount for your stipend. Like, here's all this stuff. Like, sign here if you want. Yes. Jeez. So all Dale had to do was basically just be like, I want this one. Be like, oh yeah, she's in the pile. Like, Duke. Like, so that's why it's really important that you need to reach out to these advisors. Because I was hanging out in that limbo of like, I guess I'm not going to do it. Yeah. So anyway, it's very similar at Exponent, where we all have, when a candidate gets to the stage of coming in for an interview, or during COVID, it's all virtual, but having a full day-long interview, they have a technical discussion that they have to give that's to a whole bunch of us, and then they have one-on-one meetings with all of us, and then after that, we discuss as a group, and it's very much, if we're all just like, meh, then it's kind of like, meh, up to some of the higher-ups. If we're all like, yes, then it's, obviously we're going to pursue this candidate, and if even just one or a few of us are like, I had some concerns, like, now our discussions go on, and we're really, and usually, because I'm one of the junior level members, right? Yeah. Like, I wouldn't be the one making the decision, but of all the people that work in biomechanics, sure, there's a bunch of new people, but the majority are people that have worked there 5, 6, 10, 12, 20 years. And so everyone really values each other's opinions. And it's like, we have our groove. We have a really great group of people, right? So it's important that we sustain that. And so, especially if you're, like, maybe you're the same level as me, but you've been here 6 years, and I've only been here almost 2, like, your perspective would get a lot more weight than like mine. But, and I don't know all this for certain, but it appears to me that there's the person who will be the new person's supervisor, like that person's vote or whatever counts more.
Yeah.
You know, and then the practice director and the office, like the principals of the office that you're in, those people's votes count more. So it's kind of like the higher up the chain you go, the more your vote counts. Yeah. But there's other like wild card factors, like, well, I would be the manager, so my vote counts more than like someone else at my same level in the hierarchy.
It sounds like kind of like the people that are on the lower totem pole, lower end
of the spectrum. Yeah.
End of the spectrum. They're just kind of like not gatherers of information. They're just like little stopgaps in the just to make sure we don't have like the more people we get to see this, the more chances we have to catch red flags.
Yes, and I would definitely agree with the term stopgap, because the people on the lower end, our time is less valuable, and so we are the ones that evaluate the participants or the candidates before they get to the full day interview. So when people apply, it'll be a few of us who do a phone screening. And if we're like, no, bro, that's it, they're done, and it's only our opinions that, that prevented them from moving forward. And if we like them, then we're like, okay, let's do a, small meeting or like blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then and so this is not like the principals sitting down and having these phone screenings. They don't have time for that. So we are, just like you're saying, the stopgaps. But of course, it's easier to impress us, right? But you can't get through to that full day interview until you've gone through these smaller stages, and had some of us like evaluate you on a lower level, right? It's not as long, and you don't get to talk about as much stuff, but it's still that type of thing. And so, I would say in that regard, it's very much a group. Like, sure, no one person makes at least I have not been at the point where I'm the one person that has like a big influence on the outcome. Mm-hmm. But it definitely does seem like when there are concerns, that's the whole point that we all do this, is because we each can only devote so much time, and what can you really get from someone in an hour or a 30-minute conversation, right? So if you pick up on any concerns, that's like a huge problem.
And you can see if other people call it.
Yeah, and we can evaluate how much of a concern it is, whatever. So I'm kind of talking in circles at this point, but the moral of the story is, I feel like it's very much a group decision, with, just like we've mentioned, some players have much larger weight to their opinions, but it's not like I have no opinion. They are asking my opinion. They want to know it. It's important to them to know it, right? Like, so it's very much a group thing. And I've also noticed at my job, and also in grad school too, like, there have been people, I mean, I'm sure when I wanted to switch labs, it wasn't just up to Lou and Dale. I still had to interview with other people in Lou's lab, and I'm sure they all talked about, would this person be a good fit? And there's been times at Exponent where one employee has a certain person as their supervisor, and there might be a little bit of conflict for whatever reason, and they're like, either the supervisor or the mentee or both or other people, someone comes up with that plan of like, it might be better for everyone if this person switched who their supervisor was. And sometimes they switch for like reasons like, that person does a lot more proactive work and I want to do more proactive work, so can I switch? And it's not a conflict thing. Yeah, it's just but like there have been that I'm aware of, like, and I wouldn't call it a conflict, but just like, they don't work as well together as they could, and so to optimize productivity and learning and positive, let's do a little switch.
It's funny
too. So in that regard, it's very much like you and your peers are deciding who's going to be your supervisor. And And when Janine left and Alan was going to be my supervisor, like poor Alan, nobody asked him, because I was like, Alan, I guess you're going to be my supervisor. He's like, I was? Oh, like. But Janine, I mean, I didn't have a huge discussion about it, but Janine definitely was like, I'm recommending Alan be your supervisor. Are you okay with that? And I was able to give my feedback, and I was thrilled, and all that stuff. But I felt like if I would have said like maybe if I didn't want that, I don't necessarily know that would have changed the outcome. But I definitely got the impression from Janine that it would have been heavily considered. But of course, I'm thrilled to have Alan as my supervisor, and it's working out great in my opinion. But so I feel like there's, in that kind of respect, there's kind of a lot of power. Yeah. Maybe not the final say every time, but certainly not no say.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because and I
think that's good. Just for the record, I appreciate that this setup that we have. I think it's the right balance of everyone gets to have input, but key players have more input or more ability to make a decision than others.
So it's funny, like in thinking about so I work at a charter school system, and they have schools all over the state. And like when I first kind of interviewed, there was some administrative people, and then there was also the other teacher I would be working with, and kind of like he would be the person I'd be working with the most. And it's funny, like I went from doing that interview and kind of getting into the charter school system, and then it's funny, different schools kind of have different preferences on how they
interesting
want to do it, because I went on one interview, and the headmaster was like, well, I think you're great, I think that you have a lot of potential, but I want to make sure that you talk with my staff, and I want to make sure that there's a good vibe there, and they feel good about it. And then at the another school that I interviewed, they it was much more of you're talking with the supervisors, before I had before but a decision had been made on whether I was going to be hired or not before I talked to any of the other
interesting
staff, any other people that I was
to them until they
none of the people that I was going to be actually working with on a day-to-day basis I had talked to before the offer was extended. But at the other school, it was very clear that I needed to talk with some of the staff members before
they would make a final. They would make an offer.
And then even in the current role that I'm in now, I didn't meet any of the people I was going to be working with until 2 weeks before the school year started. We may have sent some text messages over the summer, but it was definitely a situation where we were putting face to face. It was less than a month before school was starting.
Interesting.
And I definitely think it's very much up to the headmaster and how they kind of want to run. How they want to run their organization. I don't think it's a mandate from headquarters or anything.
Interesting.
So I have a scenario for you.
Okay.
All right. So say we have USA women's gymnastics.
Oh, so before you give me this scenario, I just want to give more input, because the other thing I meant to say was, always, I'm going to relate this back to gymnastics somehow. But there was actually a situation recently that was on this exact topic. So, and actually twice, I would say. So, after the Larry Nassar scandal, right, there's all sorts of problems. And they're trying to define this new, so it wasn't that, he was the team doctor, so they're trying to fill a new position that it wasn't him filling this position in the first place. But they're trying to fill a position that's kind of overseeing the national team and is a leadership role and works with everybody. And one of the people, actually twice I feel or maybe that was, at least twice I feel like there was a person that was nominated, and that person has a past that's not impeccable, right? So one time it was a female that was nominated, and there was questions about, like, she knew about the Larry Nassar stuff, and she definitely reported it to her boss, but she didn't report it to anyone else, like police or law enforcement, and people are like, she should have, and her boss was a shady AF, like, mofo that decided to try to bury it as opposed to do anything about it. So that's definitely on him, but people are also like, well, it's kind of on her too. Like, she said, hey, there's this problem that's going on, and he's like, okay, I'll take care of it, and nothing happens, and she doesn't think to follow up about it, she doesn't think to maybe go to law enforcement, like, da-da-da. But then it's also like, if your boss that you trust has told you they've talked to the FBI, like, he was actively feeding her lies that, like, he was taking, you know. So anyhow, that's a whole story for another day. But there was a large group of people that were like, she's not fit for this role because she makes poor choices in this, like, in dealing with abuse of minors, and that's a huge red flag, you know, like, blah blah blah. But the athletes all voted and were like, we really like her and we would love to work with her. And then the same thing happened with another candidate who's a male candidate, and he has a very long, extensive coaching record. But again, it's like 20 years ago, some of his coaching tactics were abusive, and there's been many athletes that have come out and said, like, this was abuse, and he himself has come out and said, I've learned and I've grown, and my coaching methods have changed as, like, science has progressed, right? So he has never once been like, I used to abuse people, but he at least he can read the room and be like, I have to say that I'm not doing that anymore, you know? And again, there was, you know, discussions with the athletes, and many of the athletes were like, yeah, I'd love to work with him. But then ultimately, for whatever reason, they went a different way. And the same female individual then applied. She was originally a college coach, and then she worked for USAG, and then she tried to be a college coach again, and a lot of the athletes, again, were like, we love her, we want her to stay, because she was given, like, a trial position because of this whole debacle situation. And a lot of the athletes were like, this is great, we want to work with her. And at the end of the day, the university decided they didn't want to be associated with someone with that history. Even though all the athletes were like, we really like her, and even though she's, like, won national championships in college in the past.
Do you think like USG did the right thing? Do you think the university did the right thing?
And so that's a judgment call, right? Because it's like, if it'd be one thing if...
So I'm asking your judgment.
Oh, yeah.
Not that you're passing judgment, but, like, what is your thought?
Well, and so my thoughts are, I think USAG definitely did the right thing, because they are really trying to show that they're getting a new culture. And if you have anyone there that was heavily involved in the old culture, and there's extremely critical, like, things that are highly questionable and people are extremely critical about them, it's really hard to say we're turning over a new leaf and we're getting a new culture if you keep employing the people that made the mistakes in the past. You know what I mean? Even though she didn't make the major mistake and whatever, it's just...
She was associated with it. Yeah.
And made a bad choice, right? Like, it's not like I was there through it, but I did my best to try to help. Like, she did do things to try to help, but there was more she could...
It wasn't her best.
It was, so I think USAG really had no choice and could not keep her. And this one is tough for me because she clearly has the skills, and she's a fantastic coach, and she hasn't abused anybody. Do you know what I mean? It's not her doling out the abuse. But yet, even though a lot of the college athletes are already over 18 and they're adults, they're not children anymore, it's still a concern to me. And it's hard, you know, like, it's hard, but it's also, at the end of the day, it's not hard. Do you know what I mean? Like, if your athlete came to you and told you that they were being molested, and you tell your boss, and your boss is like, I'm taking care of it, and you don't see any changes 2 weeks later, a month later, the person that is allegedly to be doing the molesting is still around, or, like, he's sick, so not at this competition this time, you just continue to do nothing. Do you know what I mean? Like I really liked this coach. I really respect what she can do with gymnastics, you know, and I do feel like it's a little harsh to like blacklist her forever, but on the other hand, I'm like, these are not adults that can take care of themselves. These are children. And you have to go to bat a little harder, right?
Mm.
Like, and it is hard because she didn't do like
Yeah,
the
like,
bad stuff, but I'm
yeah.
also like, at the end of the day, I do have a line in the sand, and
You crossed it,
you crossed it. So, and I can see why universities too would want to keep a good reputation, or you know. So I feel like there's things she could do that in the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, if she wanted to come back to coaching in the United States, that she might be able to do to overcome some of these past decisions. But anyway, okay, so yeah, I think there's certainly precedent in many different levels, national elite programs, collegiate programs, workplaces, where it's like, it's important to have a team dynamic, and it's important, you know, we respect each member of the team and their opinions, and so we want to know, and we do want you to have some say, like maybe you don't get the final say, but have some input, and that's actually not just lip service input, but actually considered.
Yeah. So my scenario that I was gonna throw out, like, say Simone Biles came and said, "This is who I want to be, like the team, like head coach. This is who I want to be, like I'm not gonna say we need to have all how many is it, 5 or 6 on the team?
On the Olympic team?
Yeah.
Well, it was 4 plus 1.
All right, so I'm not gonna say I need to have say on who all 4 are, but like these 2 people, I want them to be on there. I'm picking the coach. I'm picking these 2 people, and you can do the rest. Like if Simone Biles made that, like, and it's not like a public thing. It's not like something that's gonna be, but she's making those demands, and like, do you think you listen to her, or
so I can say right now,
we're good with that.
I can say right now what I would do, and also what I think USAG would do, would be to say yes, absolutely. The coach you want is the coach, like the coach portion, whatever you want, yes, like done. Don't even need to think about it. As long as that coach is not like an abusive coach.
But I'm talking about like the head coach, like the head coach over everybody.
The head coach over everybody. I fully feel like USAG would be like, done. Like, we don't even spend another second talking about this. Whatever you want, done. Because I mean, all Simone had to do was send one tweet about like, I don't like going to the ranch anymore because it gives me PTSD because that's where I was abused, and they shut the entire thing down. $multi-million facility.
But I think that's
which makes sense. No, it's a good thing. It makes sense. Except all these gymnasts have been saying they don't want to go there for a long time, and it's like obvious this is the place. Why do we keep sending all these people back there? Like, she shouldn't have had to speak up in the first place about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point is, all she had to do was send like one little tweet, and that whole thing is completely gone forever, buried. Like, anyway, so I feel strongly that they would be like, yes, coach, done. And I don't know what decisions had been made, but the head coach of the Olympic team this past year was Simone's personal coach, who I feel like if she were to have nominated somebody, it would have been those 2 people, and then they ended up being the head coaches. Anyway, as far as the team members go, I feel like they would strongly take that into account, but I don't think that they would let that be the final decision. And it might end up that their analysis agrees with those recommendations, but if their analysis disagrees, I think they would have to then think about any of the discrepancies and how to move forward, as opposed to like, oh, absolutely, we're just going to go with what Simone says. But I think they would be thinking long and hard, and especially now when things were they were highly criticized for how they did their team selection in the past. So going forward, I think they would not be able to do that. I think that they would have to, because of a lot of the criticism, I think they need to be very transparent before the competition season starts. Here are our selection criteria, and then they have to stick to those selection criteria, because they are notorious for being like, oh, we don't really know how we're going to pick the team, so people are like doing all sorts of different things, and then like they switch the rules halfway through. That's not helpful to anybody. And then they say, well, here's the rules, and then they break their own rules in selecting teams, and it's just like, that's not what.
So
That's
they can't
not
do that in the future.
Well, let's hope they don't. But my point is, there's a lot of subjectivity in all sports, gymnastics being one of them. And so trying to be as objective as possible is important. And because Simone also is like friends with a lot of these people, like there's just a conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
That outside of the gymnastics, and even if she's trying to be as unbiased as possible, it's like impossible, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's why they might say we will consider it, but if we do our mathematical analysis and we come up with this is the team that we want and it disagrees with what Team Simone wants, it's not like a no go to Simone or like no go to this, but it's a we need to have a further discussion. But I think because of the situation that had happened in the past and everything, that going forward now, it would be much less likely that they would go with what Simone wanted. I still think they'd listen. Whereas prior to the most recent Olympics, I think it would have been a lot more likely that they might have listened to what Simone wanted.
So they're trying to you believe they're trying to take the subjectivity out of it.
Yes, and I still think that USAG is a little bit too much of a control-desiring organization, and I don't think that they would have, like when it comes to who to put on the Olympic team, they would have only gone with what Simone wanted if it agreed with what they were already planning to do. So that's my. But the coach aspect.
Done.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I definitely
So
I think as sports continue to grow, it's definitely becoming more of a partnership, and there's kind of you see these things in the business world where employees are having a say in who the supervisor is, who their coworkers are, and having more input in that. And I think that's being reflected more in the sports world, whereas in the past it was no, you just Michael Jordan or basically Michael Jordan's boss. He basically was players don't win championships, organizations win championships, and that he would notoriously do things that Michael Jordan didn't agree with, but it was because he thought it was for the betterment
good
of
the
team.
organization.
And so I think now we've kind of morphed a little bit more to in having player empowerment, players having more of a say in team and roster construction, and also who's going to be the coach, who's going to be the one that runs the things, and they're going to have a bigger say in those things, and especially those top 8 to 10 players in the world that really have a huge impact on whether you win or lose, or if you win or lose a game. If you have one of the top 5 players in the world, you're always going to have a chance to win a championship. And so those top 5 players are always going to have some influence.
So going back to your concept, or what you had mentioned at the very beginning of the whole stay in your lane, and maybe these decisions weren't working out so well, we run into it a lot of just because you're a great researcher or really good at school doesn't mean you're a good teacher.
Yeah.
Right? So just because you're really good at playing basketball may not mean you're very good at
picking the play,
watching
other
and
players,
strategies and interpersonal dynamics that affect the way the team performs, right? So it's also I feel that problem is going to happen a ton.
Yeah.
Where sometimes you have people that are fantastic at all those things because they had experience as a player, but just because you have experience as a player doesn't mean you're going to be good at those things.
Yes.
Right? And there's plenty of people who are these fantastic coaches that weren't necessarily good as players. So, again, it's one of those, like, how do you vet that player has the expertise to give them the power to, or like,
well,
to
it's not about like,
rate.
I don't think it's about if they have the expertise. It's about if they have the talent. Are you good enough that I have to like give you some of my power in order to keep you here, right? Because they want the power.
Got it. So it's less about, okay.
It's less about like, do you have the expertise to make like logical and good decisions? It's about like, oh, like, you're one of the best players in the world. I want you on my team.
So is there anyone that will tell that best player when they're like, okay, best player, to keep you on my team, I'll let you decide all the plays, and then they do terribly? Is someone going to be able to be like, best player, look what you just did, like, told you so, this is why, like,
oh,
do you think there would be anyone do that? Or
they would get rid of the owner would then get rid of the person that like
allow the best player to make these choices?
And then they would allow the best player to be like, all right, let's have a discussion on who we should bring in next to try and make these things go right.
Even though it was the best player making the poor choices. So bringing
but
in
like
a new person doesn't fix anything.
The best player like had input on it. Like he had strong, like heavily weighted input. And so like ultimately, like just because you have strong, heavily weighted input, like doesn't mean that you're gonna get the blame for when the decision doesn't work.
True.
Other people definitely take the blame because those other people are replaceable.
Right.
Like your talent, your talent. The talented players are not.
Well, that seems like a lose-lose for the organization because either, unless they magically get really lucky and have one of those best players that happens to also be really good at the coaching and the play picking and all that stuff, because either they're going to bring in, like, let's say it's the coach position, right? That either they're going to bring in a coach that says, yes, best player, I'll do what you want, and then it turns out horribly, and then the coach gets fired. And then,
and it's not like 100%.
No, sure, yeah. But like, or the coach is like, no, best player, like, here's what's better, and then best player's like pissed and leaves. Like, I feel like it's a lose-lose.
Yeah, that's why it's got to be a partnership. Like, it can't just be like one way or the highway. Like, it's, or in my opinion, it's got to be like, it's got to be a partnership.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that there is a lot to be said for, like, gymnastics is a little bit different because there's only one person on the apparatus at a time. Mm-hmm. So, there's interpersonal feelings of, like, if you're really mad at someone and you see them do well, that could, like, fire you up, or, like, maybe they say something, you're in, like, an argument and they say something and that throws off your mental game or whatever. But generally, if you're on the same team, you're not trying to do that to each other. But in a sport where you're interacting with each other, if there's a little bit of beef, like, between two players, it might subconsciously change, like, well, I'm not going to pass to him, I'm going to, you know what I mean? It might affect the interpersonal dynamics, and I don't know, maybe I'm not giving these professionals enough credit that they can check their emotions at the door, right? But I don't know, like, is that how these people operate? Is it not? I think it depends on the team dynamic and the culture in the organization, things like that. And so I think all of those things play a role in determining whether it's, like, how much weight to give the players. But on some base level, I think it's good because at the end of the day, the players have to play with each other. Mm-hmm. And if, like, toxic environments really wreck even the teams with the highest potential. Yeah. Right? So whatever you need to do to avoid these toxic environments is what you should do. And I think, like, one great way to avoid that is to give people input like this. So I think it's good. I think it's great. And I just hope that a balance can be struck. Yeah. So, yeah.
All right.
So wait, did I get your opinion? What do you think?
Oh, I just think that it's a partnership and that it's continuing to build. So.
Okay, so we're on the same page.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, that's what we're doing.
Deuces.